Hello. Today I'm going to explain homework exercise number 1 from chapter 8. The first thing you have to make sure you understand when you're doing all of these assignments is that you get the premise of what's going on. In this case, we're thinking about a hypothesis. The hypothesis is that as economic development progresses, as countries get richer, the percentage of the population that practices religion gets lower. It decreases as economic development increases. We want to test this out. We want to see what the relationship would look like under different circumstances. So the exercise asks you to draw and label 4 sets of axes, like the one above. So I'm going to draw them on the screen now. We have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Economic development is on the x-axis, and level of religion is on the y-axis. Okay, test over. Hello, I'm going to explain exercise 1 from chapter 8. What you have to remember as you're going through these exercises, because we're going to do all of them in chapter 8, so it pays to start doing them right now. What you have to remember is that to get the answers to the questions, you have to understand the premise of the question to begin with. In this case, a researcher has a hypothesis. That researcher believes that as countries get wealthier, the level of religious practice in those countries would decline. And we want to show what that relationship would look like under different correlations in this particular problem set. So the question then asks you to draw 4 axes on the screen. So I'm going to draw those up there. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it also asks you to label the axes. On the x-axis, you have economic development. And on the y-axis, you've got level of religious practice. All right. And this is true for all of them. Then it says, is the researcher hypothesizing, for question A, a positive correlation between x and y, a negative correlation between x and y, or no correlation? And explain. Well, this researcher has said that they think that as economic development increases, religion decreases. That would be a negative correlation. As one increases, the other decreases. So that's negative. Then it says in the first set of axes you have drawn, use a dot to represent each of the 10 countries in a study, and depict a correlation of -1 between economic development and level of religiosity. This doesn't have to be exact, but it's going to look something like this. These are the observations. As economic development increases, which you can see here, it's the same as down here, level of religion decreases at a 1-to-1 rate. So for every 1 point increase in economic development, you get a 1 point decrease in religion. Now for C, it says depict a correlation of +1. Well, that would look something like this. There we go. As economic development increases, religion increases. They're correlated at +1 over here in this set of axes. Then C says, oh, sorry, that was C. D says in the third set of axes, depict a correlation of 0 between economic development and level of religiosity. Now here, there are multiple correct answers. So a correlation of 0 means as economic development changes, religion does not. Or as religion changes, economic development does not. But there's no relationship. What that would look like is something like this. So here are our observations. As economic development goes from low to high, religion does not move. It stays at the same level. Another answer that would be just as good would be this one. In this case, as religion goes from low to high, economic development doesn't go anywhere. It stays right there. Either of those would reflect a 0 correlation between the two variables. Finally, well, not yet finally, I guess, the last drawing is in E. The question says, suppose the researcher finds a correlation of negative 0.7 between the independent and dependent variables. Show what that would look like. Well, negative 0.7 as a slope isn't going to be as steep as up here, the slope of negative 1. So it's going to look something like this. For every drop of 0.7 in religion, you get a 1-point increase in economic development. So it's going to look more like that. Again, doesn't have to be exact, but you can see the idea. That's a line that's less steep than that line. The correlation is not as great, but it's still strong and negative. Finally, now we're here at the end. For the question F, the researcher concludes, based on a correlation of negative 0.7, that the level of economic development explains 70% of the variation in level of religiosity. Is this correct? And it gives you a hint here. It says, review the difference between Pearson's R and R squared. Well, in this case, what we know, just from that difference alone, is that Pearson's R, which is correlation, is not the same as R squared. And R squared tells you the percentage of the variation that knowing, or variation in the dependent variable explained by knowing the independent variable. In this case, to get from Pearson's R, which is negative 0.7, to R squared, you square Pearson's R. So negative 0.7 multiplied by negative 0.7 is positive 0.49. It would be correct to say that the level of economic development explains 49% of the variation in level of religiosity, but not 70%, 49. That concludes exercise 1. Thank you, and I'll see you again for exercise 2.